Hello, and welcome to Decarbonize, the clean energy podcast from Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota nonprofit working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. My name is Jo Olson. I'm the Communications and Engagement Director here at Fresh Energy and also your host for today. I'm excited to be joined by Fresh Energy's Executive Director, Michael Noble, and our entire public affairs team, which consists of the lead director, Justin Fay, Senior Associate of Public Affairs, Anna Johnson, and our Coalition Communications and Policy Associate, say that 5 times fast, Eric Fowler. Welcome, you guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So great.
Here.
Good to be here.
Well, we are here today because the 2022 session of the Minnesota Legislature is nearly upon us, and there's already just a ton to talk about. Minnesota's got a split legislature, a budget surplus, bonding and budget proposals are already on the table, and more. And today we're going to talk about all of that. Our plan is to take the next 45 minutes or so of this podcast to dig a little deeper into our expectations and hopes for session. Typically I'd be inclined to start off the discussion to talk about some of our big successes during the 2021 session, but it was such a huge year for clean energy and climate. I really couldn't do it justice. It was one of the most impactful years since 2007. So instead, I'm going to put a link in the podcast details for listeners to a recap blog post of what happened at the 2021 session last year. So you guys can click on that and catch up there. And I think we're just going to dive right into the questions about this year. So before we start talking about the 2022 session here in Minnesota, let's step back and talk about what's happening at the federal level. Thanks to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there are already significant funds heading to Minnesota for things like electric vehicles, public transit, weatherization assistance, transmission and grid, coal plant community transition, and more. Michael, do you want to kick us off with an update on these funds?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. Everybody knows that the lion's share of the climate investments are in the next bill coming up, the bipartisan or the Build Back Better legislation. But there was a lot of climate and energy provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure bill as well. And obviously, the big difference is the infrastructure bill has become law, signed by the governor, signed by the president, and the money is on its way to the states. So we did a fantastic event down in Rochester. Both Eric and Justin did this, and I think there's a link to it on our website, if I'm not mistaken. And just to click off a few of the top line highlights, there'll be about $68 million for electric vehicle infrastructure in Minnesota. That'll presumably be mostly super fast charging and build out the EV infrastructure we already have, which is, I think, at least a B- in Minnesota, and maybe we'll get to A- after this next wave of investment. There's a $818 million for public transit, and there is seem to be a large agreement across party lines that transit can be a compromise area if we focus on bus rapid transit. Light rail is quite controversial, but bus rapid transit seems to have support from both political parties. So $818 million for transit is awesome. Nationally, there's $3.5 billion nationwide for one of my favorites, the Weatherization Assistance Program, helping families with limited resources and limited incomes weatherize their homes and reduce their reliance on fossil fuels and get more comfortable and safer in their homes. And there's another $10 billion for upgrading the transmission system and the electric grid nationwide. Another $750 million nationally to help communities that are dependent on coal-fired power plants, help them transition to the future. And that's a wonderful complement to investments that Minnesota Legislature has made at the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. They now have an Office of Energy Transition. So think about communities like Becker, Minnesota, or communities like Oak Park Heights that are dependent on coal, or communities like Grand Rapids. And now there's investment for making a transition to the future. So lots of highlights to talk about. And we're going to link right here in the show notes to the blog post that we did, kind of running down all our favorite clean energy, climate, bipartisan investments that came up in the infrastructure bill that passed toward the end of 2021. So we want to obviously work very, very thoughtfully and very aggressively to see to it that our state government maximizes these funds, and our cities and our towns and our counties get access to these federal funds. We want to leave no stone unturned to benefit everybody in Minnesota who can participate in these use of these one-time federal dollars for climate resilience and climate infrastructure.
I'll just add a little note about that timing. I think I got used to kind of this really rapid pace that money was getting distributed from the American Rescue Plan, right? And that was really the requirements were to spend down that money so quickly. So it came down from the feds and it went out the door. And this pace is going to be a little bit slower. This is not emergency spending so much as long-term investments. So we don't yet know when the money will all be fully available for Minnesota. It may be as late as this summer by the time the federal agencies are actually providing guidance to the state, which could then in turn trigger another summer of special sessions, which are unfortunately beginning to feel normal at this point. But that is going to play out a little bit more slowly than the money that we just saw come down from the American Rescue Plan.
Thank you, Eric, and welcome to your first Fresh Energy podcast. Thank you for being here. And
That's
thanks, Michael.
true.
Michael,
Thanks.
too. Yeah, you both are kind of a dream team on that answer. But now I want to talk about the other big federal elephant in the room, the Build Back Better Act. We have yet to see in what form the Build Back Better Act will come to fruition at all. So Justin and Eric, can you talk about what the latest and greatest news is on that front?
Well, Joe, maybe just a little bit of background and history to start. As folks probably are familiar, the Biden administration's agenda coming into the year was that, kind of the agenda that he ran on and developed and announced upon taking office really was centered in two pieces of legislation that were very closely connected and intended to be complementary. And one of them was the bipartisan infrastructure bill that Michael and Eric just talked about. And the second part was called the Build Back Better Act. And that includes a much broader set of funding that including but not limited to climate investments. But unlike the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it's been really, really bogged down in congressional negotiations for a number of months now, with a lot of focus on one senator in particular, Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia. And there's been a few it's a little bit like Lucy with the football, where there'll be little news stories about how it feels like we're getting close. They're getting close. There's a deal between the president and Senator Manchin, and then all of a sudden, oh, nope, something fell apart. And the simple reality, the best way that I think I can sum it up is that in terms of where the bill is right now and what's going to happen next, nobody knows nothing about nothing, same as it ever was. And, I remain optimistic that they'll get something done. And the, latest sort of inside the DC Beltway buzz is that they'll try to break that bill up and maybe do it in pieces. So like the climate provisions in one bill and some other items elsewhere, but we don't really know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add that thinking about what is in this bill in terms of climate and energy, there's a decent amount of overlap with some of the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure package. But the main takeaway is, as proposed, because again, this hasn't passed, Build Back Better is bigger. Every single investment it makes is much bigger. than the infrastructure package. And one of the things that we have been doing at Fresh Energy is really advocating to keep bold climate investments at the core of this package. We led a sign-on letter asking Minnesota's congressional delegation to support the boldest climate investments possible. And even though this remains uncertain, we are going to continue to advocate and apply pressure for the Build Back Better Act at all levels. And that includes continuing our collaboration and support of Minnesota Senators Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar, and our state leaders who are speaking up in support as well, such as Governor Tim Walz. We really are going to be there at every step, doing what we can to ensure that clean energy and climate get a piece of the pie.
So, one thing I want to just chime in on this is that as the president and the Congress were struggling with these two major pieces of legislation, there was growing pressure from all across the president's constituencies that voting rights is needing his attention. And, historically, voting rights has been one of the most bipartisan areas of agreement. Everybody agrees that everybody gets to vote, but United States Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is one of the point people on voting rights and actually the point person on voting rights in the United States Senate, her quip now is some people don't want some people to vote. And so sadly, voting rights has fallen into the bucket of partisan debate rather than we're all in this together. And they dialed back their expectations to find Republican votes. They found no Republican votes. They discussed amending the filibuster so that there could be exception or an exemption that perhaps people who are opposed to voting rights might be required to stand and oppose it until they were exhausted all their arguments and all their time, and then they could vote it through. But this chapter isn't over, but nothing I can imagine could be more important to climate policy and climate protection and Fresh Energy's broad agenda is that everybody gets to vote. If they want to vote, they get to vote. And we shouldn't have states throwing up impediments, making it more difficult to vote. It seems logical and fair that we should be working on making it easier and more straightforward to vote. So, we are just bending over backwards, nonpartisan in everything we do. But a lot of this is arising from, the big perpetual lie that the last election was stolen, that the past president continues to infect the national dialogue with this idea that there's something wrong with our election system, when every objective independent analysis said it was the most free and fair election in American history. It's just that many, 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 many people voted. 81 million people voted for one guy, and 75 million people voted for the other guy, which is an incredible turnout in voting. And more voting is better for democracy. That's objectively true. So I hope that people who have their top issue as climate and climate protection and energy, that they will also be in communication with their United States Senator Smith and their United States Senator Klobuchar to thank them for continuing to push hard on making sure everybody in America gets to vote.
Thank you, Michael. Now I'm going to reel us back to Minnesota. I know that we're anticipating that infused to all policy debates this year will be the hot button issue of Minnesota's $7.7 billion budget surplus and how it should be spent. On top of that, it's a bonding year. Michael, would you talk a little bit about some of those larger themes that will be in play in 2022 and how you anticipate they'll affect progress on clean energy and climate legislation, or all legislation for that matter?
Well, maybe I'll limit myself to the very, very top line. This is an election year. Everybody's on the ballot. The governor's on the ballot. Every senator's on the ballot. Every member's on the House. Every member of the House of Representatives on the ballot. So a lot of stuff that's going to happen is people trying to get advantage this way or that way and help themselves and hurt the other guy. That's just unfortunate nature of a political year. Having said that, we already mentioned that, we were wildly successful in 2021. Well, I would say as successful as we possibly could have been in 2021, working with a divided legislature, the only one in the 50 states that's divided between the two political parties, by the way. And we intend to continue our effort to be successful. The top line big picture story is that it is a bonding year, which means borrow money to invest for the long term. The governor is going to have a very, very big, bold proposal, and the House and Senate will have proposals as well. The 800-pound gorilla in the legislative session is the budget surplus. I mean, I've been watching the legislature for a long time. I certainly don't remember any time where we had $7.7 billion more revenue than we have expenses. So obviously some people are going to say, give all the money back to the voters. It's their money. And some people are going to say, we need to use this special one-time windfall for investments that have been delayed and deferred and ignored and avoided, and now's the time to invest. So those 2 points of view are the basic architecture of the political debate, and fresh energy is going to wade right into it. So that's the top line, but I'll let Anna give you a little bit more granularity here on what we're seeing from the House and the Senate and from the governor as well.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I think you laid it all out really well. It's exciting to see some big proposals from the governor and the House Climate Action Caucus so far, with some really meaningful and ambitious climate investment. So we'll be advocating for those funds to be spent smartly and well on the things that matter most. Another thing I'll just touch on is just that there are a lot of retirements that have already been announced. So a lot of legislators kind of, I don't want to say throwing in the towel, because often they go on to do many other different, interesting things. So several members have already said they won't be running again. And the maps are being redrawn, and that'll come out in February. So every 10 years after the census results come in, we redraw the maps to reflect how the demographics have shifted. So we can expect even more retirement announcements around February or later after we get those results. And I won't speculate about how, having a final opportunity to work as a legislator might impact each individual member, but just the fact that I will say that it probably will make a difference for each individual, knowing that this is kind of their last opportunity to serve.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, legacies are super important for folks as they move on to the next phase. So I think it'd be fun to pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about Fresh Energy's process for identifying legislative and policy goals. So Justin, I know over your 3 years at Fresh Energy, you've been working to make sure that all staff are involved in that process and that it's creative too. So can you give our listeners some insight into how we narrow down what Fresh Energy is going to go for each year?
Well, Joe, first let me say, as a professional lobbyist, I don't ever want the curtain getting pulled back. I like the curtain right where it is. No, I'm kidding. I think it's interesting. Fresh Energy is in an interesting sort of position in that we've been growing steadily now for going on 3 decades. And Michael will talk sometimes about his memories of starting at Fresh Energy when it was a 2-person shop. And today we're somewhere in the range of 30 staff. And as we've grown and our scope of work has broadened and diversified, the process of putting together and sort of being deliberate and intentional and coordinated about what we work on has become more and more important. And so that's something that our public affairs team takes very, very seriously, that we need to be able to kind of foster both inclusive collaboration with our staff so that we're generating good ideas and helping to ground, and then also helping to ground those ideas in both the kind of political landscape of the time and what we think is likely to be possible or achievable, or might set up a narrative that we'll want to sort of pursue later when X issue becomes more possible and more achievable. And then also to coordinate across our staff, make sure that all of our programs are getting airtime, so to speak, that we're advancing the kind of totality of our program expertise and work and mission, and that we don't get crosswise, so that we don't unintentionally find a situation where our buildings team is trying to do something that our folks working on electric vehicles think is a really bad idea. And so that's a really, really big part, maybe the biggest part from a time perspective of the public affairs work, is simply keeping all of that straight and on the tracks. And so we actually have formalized a process for how we assemble our agenda. Our policy staff actually go through essentially an application process where they write issue briefs on issues that they want to propose fresh energy work on in the coming session. And then the public affairs team goes through a series of meetings to review those proposals and discuss them and make some determinations about what's ready, what maybe needs a little bit more work, if there's questions that we have that need to be, for things that need to be refined or fleshed out. And then ultimately bring back a slate of proposals. And when I say a slate, it's we don't do a formal. It's not like a big reveal or something where the trumpets blare and out comes the fresh energy agenda. But it's more of an internal sort of understanding of what the focus priorities for the public affairs team are going to be in a given year.
Yeah, and well said, Justin. And something I really appreciate about our policy staff is the ideas they come to us with are super well informed. They're real technical experts. They spend a lot of time working on implementation of policies and working at the PUC and just the technical details of the clean energy transition. So they're bringing a lot of expertise to the policy ideas and the policy agenda that we create. So after we have dozens of kind of unique ideas from our staff, we winnow it down and move forward with a list and put some things on the back burner for to work on in the interim or for the following session. I'll also say that the legislature does have its own ideas. They have a lot of ideas. I think they set records for number of bill introductions every year. So more and more ideas all the time. So we also, as a public affairs team, are responsive to what the legislators care about and how they want to advance clean energy in their own way. So we provide technical support. We can help connect them with advocates and spokespeople and work with individuals just on the things that they care about and are meaningful to them.
And close circuit to any legislators listening to this, please don't have too many ideas this year. We're tired.
Well, I'm curious. I'm wondering if something for us to revisit in 2023 is maybe we do need a big reveal with trumpets and a marching band. What if that helps us tackle some of the big issues? Just consider it, Justin.
We do have a couple of fresh energy staff that are in bands, so this is achievable.
I'm going to put it on my list. All right. So now we know how the sausage is made and how we set some legislative goals for the year internally. Let's dig into some of the goals that we know are on the table already. And let's start with building codes. Michael, can you kick us off talking about building codes and where we are currently this year?
The Minnesota Energy Code for buildings has been something Fresh Energy has worked on since actually before we were incorporated in 1992. We're a long-time building code engaged party. And the top level information is that the commercial energy code for commercial buildings is usually quite collegial and steadily moves along apace, getting better and better. And the residential energy code for houses is a dogfight with the home builders. And if you gain an inch, you're happy for the victory. The legislature does not like to get involved in building codes necessarily, but for the last 2 or 3 years, there's been commercial energy code legislative proposals co-sponsored by the two chairs of the Energy Committee in the House and the Senate. And I'll leave it to my colleague, Justin, to give you the blow-by-blow. But my simple question is this. If all of society, every aspect of human enterprise is going to be carbon-free or net zero or non-emitting by 2050, why are we building carbon-heavy dependent buildings in 2022? Are we going to just retrofit them all? So that's the simple question that Fresh Energy asks, is when do we get to start building all our commercial buildings without any carbon footprint? When do we get that?
Well, that is the $1 million question, Michael, and at least in legislation, folks are trying to answer that question. So in 2021, the bill that Michael referenced that was bipartisan, the House Democrat Energy Chair and the Senate Republican Energy Chair were the lead authors, would have put Minnesota's, specifically the commercial energy code, on track to reach net zero for new construction no later than 2036. That would be at least a regionally significant achievement, and I think would move the needle nationally for particularly a cold weather state like Minnesota to set that goal, not just as a something that we're going to have incentives for or something, but as actually the binding law of the land, that's what the code is going to be able to accomplish over time. So it's a really, really big deal, and Fresh Energy has been working on this policy for a number of years. I should also acknowledge the Department of Labor and Industry at the state level and the Walz administration that has gotten behind this effort, starting with a extensive stakeholder process that the administration convened in 2020. The last meeting, which wrapped up like just maybe a few days before everything in the state shut down for the pandemic. But we've kept the progress going through all of that, and we're able to have legislation that the agency led passed the Minnesota House last year, and we did get a bill introduced, but was not acted on in the Minnesota Senate. As we've been developing this with a broad coalition over the years, I really need to just sort of highlight and recognize the wonderful coalition of cities in Minnesota that are grappling with these issues. That the energy code is adopted and updated at the state level as a state level decision. But cities, many of whom have climate action plans and are increasingly concerned about their buildings happening in their jurisdiction for the reasons that Michael enumerated, are really the driving force and the momentum behind this legislation. And we're going to be continuing to work on this in 2022, both the legislation that we worked on in 2021 and continuing to explore other models and mechanisms specifically for cities to have more flexibility to drive the creation of better buildings in their communities.
Thank you, Justin. And while we're talking about buildings anyway, I'm hoping we can also share some details about the exciting new legislation we are helping put together about electric panel upgrades. Eric, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an exciting new idea that we are working on here at Fresh Energy. Like Michael said, it is critical to reduce carbon from buildings. We're making headway in other sectors, right? You can see the graph if you look this up. Carbon emissions from electricity going down. We've made headway on transportation in various ways, but actually our building emissions are still going in the wrong direction. And electrification of those buildings is one of the key, that's how we get rid of the carbon from our buildings. We have to make sure that we are converting from, for example, I have in my basement right now a gas water heater that I am very much looking forward to replacing. And I'm not looking that much forward to it, to have to pay for it and all that, but I'm excited to replace it with a heat pump, super efficient electric water heater. And there's a long checklist. If you have to replace your stove, some folks still have gas dryers. You start to hit a wall where you do not have the electrical capacity in your home to do all of the things that previously you were doing with a combination of electricity and fossil fuels, right? So we need more electrical capacity. And what we are proposing to clear that path is establishing a pilot grant program to support Minnesotans who need to upgrade beyond a conventional 100 amp panel in the first place. And we're thinking about this as applying both single family homes as well as multifamily units. This has benefits beyond just the building itself. There's also, can you charge an electric vehicle? Does your electric panel have the capacity to charge your electric vehicle as you're electrifying, not only your building, but the rest of your life? And so this is an exciting opportunity to speed up that residential electrification transition. And it's been great to work with, particularly our colleague Mario Heda has been helping to lead on this. And it's been a big collaboration. Like we heard about earlier, in this process that we want to make sure that our teams are collaborating and not siloed or not kind of separated. So this bill is a collaboration between Energy Access and Equity team and our Energy Transition team. And we'll have more updates as we keep this bill moving forward.
Yeah, I think this is an exciting one, and really not difficult to imagine why it's necessary. I live in a house that was built in 1907, not unlike most of the houses on my block, I assume. And in my attic where I live, which is a little chilly, and I sometimes have to use space heaters, even though I know that's not the most efficient source of energy. If I have like a space heater and a blow dryer plugged at the same time, I blow a fuse. So I can't imagine what adding an induction stove plus an electric vehicle plus a hot water heater that are all electric would do to my home. And so yeah, excited about this one, and I think I imagine a big need for electric panel upgrades across the state.
Well, if there's a list, put me on it because I need one too. Surprise, surprise. All right, let's move on to the Future Fuels Act. It was introduced in 2021, and I know that Governor Walz has identified it as a priority for his administration, and there's interest at the legislature too. Anna, what should people know about the Future Fuels Act and what it is and how Fresh Energy is involved?
That's a great question, Joe. The transportation sector is the highest emitting single sector for greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of progress being made in transit and electric vehicles, but a low carbon fuel standard or the Future Fuels Act is a policy to help accelerate decarbonization of the transportation sector. And the way that it works is it's a credit and trading scheme to incentivize lower greenhouse gas intensive transportation fuels, such as electricity for electric vehicles. Fresh Energy has been a continuing member of a broad coalition of stakeholders supporting this policy, and Governor Walz and the legislature have both expressed interest in the policy. The Future Fuels Act was introduced and authored by Representative Lippert in the House last year and Senator Senjum in the Senate. And Governor Walz has been leading stakeholder meetings to get input from all sorts of different entities about what they think a Future Fuels Act or a low carbon fuel standard would look like in its best form. What people really should know and what Fresh Energy is focused on is that the devil is very much in the details of this policy. So the way it works is it relies on the carbon intensity of a fuel to create the different credits for greenhouse gases. And carbon intensity means carbon accounting. And there are lots of different methodologies and ways you can do carbon accounting, different things to incorporate and things that you can omit or include that will get to greenhouse gas emissions either faster or slower, and will also incorporate things like soil and water health or not. So Fresh Energy has been very much involved in the development of this policy, and will continue to be working on it in at both the legislature and with the Walz administration.
So I just might chime in here that this was a huge priority of the Minnesota Department of Transportation's Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council that I served on for 2 years. And just so people have the big picture, this is really going to accelerate the transition of cars all running on, dead dinosaur bones to cars running on electrons from the sun and the wind. That's what this is primarily about, is accelerating that inevitable momentum as fast as we can. But the politically tricky thing is we want agriculture and farmers and rural people and ethanol interests and biodiesel interests. We want them to be on the side of the future rather than on the side of the dinosaur bones. And that requires some long, hard strategic conversations between different constituencies. And Governor Walz is very, very well positioned to mediate, moderate, orchestrate, balance these concerns. But just remember, the big picture is out with the old, the oil industry, and in with the new, the electric industry, for running our transportation economy.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Anna. So since we're kind of already on the subject, I want to talk about electric mobility. And even though Fresh Energy and a bunch of other of our nonprofit partners, and in fact, all Minnesotans, had a really high-profile win last year when Minnesota became an official clean cars state, that was really just the beginning. Justin, can you fill us in a bit on the multifaceted approach that you're taking across agencies and the legislature on electric transportation?
Absolutely, and this really is. I like the word multifaceted. It really, I think, describes our work in this area well. And there's a lot of threads that run through this particular subject area that are complementary and interwoven, and kind of in order that it makes sense for policies to happen. That has to be sort of knit together, and that's really why the accomplishment of Clean Cars Minnesota was such a big deal, because that really lays the groundwork for this transition to clean electric transportation that is at the heart of our strategy to clean up the emissions from this sector. So we do have our sights set on kind of a next step, and that's mapping a path to zero emissions for medium and heavy duty vehicles as well. So Clean Cars Minnesota was specific to light duty cars and trucks, which is for good reason. That's by far the largest source of emissions from ground transportation. But we do have to start a conversation about how we're going to reduce emission and eventually eliminate emissions from the other sectors. And those, what tend to be long haul, medium and heavy duty vehicles are going to be harder and more challenging. And that's the challenge that we're starting to embark on now. We're also having conversations with the Minnesota Department of Transportation and other public decision makers around fleet electrification, so that at the both state and local level, government fleets are both independently a significant generator of vehicle miles traveled and carbon emissions. They also have a significant impact on the price of particular types of vehicles. And the more that we can sort of think about and help fleet managers be successful at transitioning their fleets from conventional fossil fuel powered vehicles to clean electric alternatives, that's going to have ripple effects throughout our economy, save taxpayers money, save local governments money, and increase the availability and lower the price of electric vehicles for all of us. Fresh Energy is really, really fortunate to have had a wonderful colleague, Anjali Bains, working on our team for the last couple of years. She's actually transitioned to a new role in our organization, and so she's kind of doing two jobs for us today, serving as our lead director of energy access and equity, and continuing to support all of us on the public affairs team and elsewhere in Fresh Energy as our resident electric vehicle expert. And so that's included participation along with Michael in something called the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Committee. It's convened by the Minnesota Department of Transportation and is really taking a wholesale look at transportation issues throughout the state and how we get where we need to go. But I really wanted to just acknowledge Anjali's contributions in particular as she sort of eventually hands off this work to what will be a new hire at Fresh Energy here in the coming weeks. So we'll be excited to announce.
I might chime back in again and just say that this work by the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council was co-chaired by the commissioner, Margaret Anderson Kelleher, whose recent announcement, she's going to become the director of public works for the city of Minneapolis. And one of our favorite utility presidents, president of Xcel Energy Minnesota and the Dakotas, Chris Clark. And while there was a huge focus, like one whole division of the advisory council was on electrify everything we can. How do we electrify light duty vehicles, medium duty vehicles? What about long haul trucking? Should we put transmission power lines along the highways in order to have high-speed charging for 18-wheelers? We really went into electrify everything we can. But there was also a very important constituency led by close friends and allies of Fresh Energy to ask the hard question, how do we reduce the amount of driving? Like, wait a minute, our neighborhoods are overrun by cars. These cars are 6,000 pounds. You get out on the street with a stroller, you might get killed in the crosswalk. How do we make our neighborhoods more friendly for people walking, for disabled people in wheelchairs, for people on bicycles, for people who don't own a car? People don't want a car. People are like, I'm not going to own a damn car. We have to have choices for people to bike and walk and ride public transportation. And I want to applaud and honor Margaret Anderson Kelleher, the Commissioner of Transportation, that she totally gets that. And I hope that in her new leadership role for the city of Minneapolis, she'll be able to rally the community around biking and walking and transit, that she won't be responsible for, the new highway between Rochester and Nobles County. That won't be in her portfolio anymore.
Thank you, Michael. So now a question for all of you. Anything as we near the end of the podcast that you'd like to add about the 2022 session that we should be looking ahead to? Anything that we didn't already cover in today's discussion? Michael, you just finished talking, but you are on a roll. So do you want to kick us off here?
Well, just a kind of a summary view is that, all of human enterprise has to be carbon free. We have about 25 years or 25 years to get there. We got to get halfway there in the next 6 or 8 years. What Fresh Energy's donors and members expect from us is ambition and eyes on the prize and doing everything we can to have an equitable, just society that's prosperous and carbon-free. So, that's a commercial for Fresh Energy, but, we have to make progress no matter what public officials are in charge. And this team of leaders that we have is a team of leaders that we made very, very meaningful progress with in 2021. And the folks on this call, Justin and Eric and Anna and me, we're going to roll up our sleeves with the entire Fresh Energy policy staff and make meaningful progress in 2022 as well.
Well, and if I can just maybe build on that briefly, I think Michael mentioned that we had a number of accomplishments in 2021, and I really think that demonstrates that divided control government can move the needle on climate, and so that excuse doesn't exist anymore. Yes, both being an advocate and being a legislator in a split control, divided control, situation is challenging. But we collectively, with partners and utilities and grassroots advocates and elected officials and the administration, delivered the most impactful session in a decade in 2021. And there is absolutely no reason it can't happen again. And in fact, it has to become the new normal. That we get folks from diverse constituencies working together and accomplishing results. And the session we just had simply proves that it is possible.
Yeah, and I guess I can go next. I think I've lived in the Midwest my whole life, so maybe I'm biased, but I really do think that these wins as a northern cold climate state here in the Midwest with divided government, in a region with a lot of purple state politics, are some of the reasons why these wins and the progress and doing this work in Minnesota really matters. The Midwest leads the country in emissions. But we also have high ambitions, and I think we are going to keep trying to lead here from the Midwest by keeping the momentum going in Minnesota.
Yeah, and one of the things I heard in the discussion around the most recent Conference of the Parties in Glasgow is I heard someone put it in terms of the number of months that we have. So basically, to get to the president's pledge of 52% greenhouse gas reductions by 2030, we have about 95 months, or 9 years, or if you think in terms of bienniums like this team does, about 4.5 bienniums. So we've got a lot of work to do and not a lot of time. And we also know from the IPCC that every single incremental amount of greenhouse gas reductions matters and makes a difference. So we'll just be working hard to make sure we can achieve every single reduction we can in Minnesota.
Well, thank you all. This has been a really wonderful conversation today, and I think that's a wrap. We've given our listeners some insight into what's coming up with the legislative session this year and what it will mean for clean energy and climate. And although we have not resolved the big issue of will we have a marching band or not, I think we can just let this conversation be done for the day. So thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, glad to be part of this. This is dynamite.
Thanks, everyone.
Yo.
All right, folks listening, you can stay up to date on Fresh Energy's work via our blog at fresh-energy.org or follow us on social media. And in the meantime, thank you for listening and subscribing to our podcast. Don't forget that you can support Fresh Energy's work by making a donation today. Visit our website at fresh-energy.org and click Donate in the upper right corner. And if you're free next Thursday, February 3rd at noon, register and join Fresh Energy and Energy News Network for a virtual panel discussions with journalists about what equity in climate and energy journalism should look like. and what steps news organizations can take to move in that direction. And we've got a really awesome panel, including a reporter from Grist, which I'm very excited about. Save your virtual seat today by clicking on the events tab on our website and registering. And we hope to see you there. Thank you all for listening.